Okay, I've got a good one today by Louise Gluck. Um, Louise Gluck was a poet. I'm sorry to have to use the past tense. She, American poet who died a couple of years ago at age 80, I believe, and produced a number of books, some essays too, but mostly poetry. And this is the her book, "Faithful and Virtuous Night," from 2014, is the first one that I've given any sustained attention to. I think I've caught a poem of hers here and there over the years, but I hadn't really intensively read anything by Louise Gluck before getting hold of this book sometime within the last year. And I was considering, uh, I suppose about four or five poems kind of rose to the top for me at the moment. There's one very nice one called Midnight in here. There's another one called Aboriginal Landscape. Um, yeah, that's very nice. The title poem, "Faithful and Virtuous Night," is really terrific. And in a vacuum, I would have preferred to do that, to talk about that one, but um, it's a bit lengthier than is ideal for me. So I don't want these videos to be too long, and I want to be able to read the poem twice. So I don't want to spend um, a whole lot of time having to read a lengthy poem. So but that's a terrific poem. And then there's another one that I liked a lot called "The Past." But the one that I'm going to talk about is one called "A Sharply Worded Silence." And if you have seen any of the previous videos here, then you'll know that I place utmost importance on what can't be said in the experience of art, and I find that its true power is after you say all the things that you can say and should say about it. Um, uh, there finally, its power is something you can't really account for, um, um, and that's something to be to be valued and to be remembered, and to um, keep in your mind, because I think it's a good safeguard against imposing a theme on a piece of art. I think we all want to do that to some extent. We all want to say what it means, especially an art form that uses words. Words are supposed to say things, supposed to mean things. Um, and I think it can help you kind of be more comfortable with some indeterminacy, or some, Keats, a poet of some note, said somewhere, I think it was in one of his letters. I mean, I think it's a famous term, negative capability. he he talks about. I wish I should have grabbed it before I sat down, but he talks about the the need to be comfortable in in mystery and perplexity, in indeterminateness, um, as something that's necessary. I mean, for life, I think he thought, but certainly for the appreciation of art. There's something, if it's good and it's serious and it's ambitious, there's going to be something elusive about it. There's going to be something that escapes all analysis and um, summary and what have you. So, anyway, so "A Sharply Worded Silence." Um, the poem certainly would have caught my eye for that reason, having that word in the title. I mean, I tend to look at poems as um, especially intense uses of concentrated uses of language to deliver you to a place where there are no words, and where the most powerful feelings available to us, uh, can emerge. And so um, you might say a poem is a sharply worded silence. It's certainly a carefully worded silence. It's another image is in Lacan, in one of his uh, seminars. I think it's the Ethics of Psychoanalysis. He comes to a point. Lacan's preposterously difficult to read, by the way, but nonetheless, in the course of this this seminar. They're all published. He's talking about art. He's talking about it as a prototypical piece of art, a potter's vessel, and I don't um, remember exactly how he put it, and I'm not so sure that it would help you for me to tell you exactly how he put it because he had this gnomic way of using words that I think made, although there are very deep things I think in Lacan, it made him, I think, more difficult than he needed to be. But anyway, he 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 talks about the potter's some potter's vessel, however ornate it is, whatever it is. What it's really about is the emptiness on the inside, and I kind of love that idea. This You've got this exquisitely and deliberately uh, contrived object um, that is kind of delivering you to this wordless or empty space where there is only our wonder and awe um, and perplexity. Um, so, uh, you know, I think those might be decent framing ideas for this poem. So I'll just read the poem now. A sharply worded silence. Let me tell you something, said the old woman. We were sitting facing each other in the park at blank, a city famous for its wooden toys. At the time, I had run away from a sad love affair, and as a kind of penance or self punishment, I was working at a factory, carving by hand the tiny hands and feet. The park was my consolation, particularly in the quiet hours after sunset, when it was often abandoned. But on this evening, when I entered what was called the Contessa's Garden, I saw that someone had preceded me. It strikes me now I could have gone ahead, but I had been set on this destination. All day I had been thinking of the cherry trees with which the glade was planted, whose time of blossoming had nearly ended. We sat in silence. Dusk was falling, and with it came a feeling of enclosure as in a train cabin. When I was young, she said, I liked walking the garden path at twilight, and if the path was long enough, I would see the moon rise. That was for me the great pleasure, not sex, not food, not worldly amusement. I preferred the moon's rising, and sometimes I would hear at the same moment the sublime notes of the final ensemble of The Marriage of Figaro. Where did the music come from? I never knew. Because it is because it is the nature of garden paths to be circular, each night after my wanderings, I would find myself at my front door, staring at it, barely able to make out, in darkness, the glittering knob. It was, she said, a great discovery, albeit my real life. But certain nights, she said, the moon was barely visible through the clouds and the music never started, a night of pure discouragement. And still the next night I would begin again, and often all would be well. I could think of nothing to say. This story, so pointless as I write it out, was in fact interrupted at every stage with trance like pauses and prolonged intermissions, so that by this time night had started. Ah, the capacious night, the night so eager to accommodate strange perceptions. I felt that some important secret was about to be entrusted to me, as a torch is passed from one hand to another in a relay. My sincere apologies, she said. I had mistaken you for one of my friends. And she gestured towards the statue we sat among. Heroic men, self sacrificing, saintly women, holding granite babies to their breasts. Not changeable, she said, like human beings. I gave up on them, she said, but I never lost my taste for circular voyages. Correct me if I'm wrong. Above our heads, the cherry blossoms had begun to loosen in the night sky, or maybe the stars were drifting and falling apart, and where they landed, new worlds would form. Soon afterward, I returned to my native city and was reunited with my former lover. And yet, increasingly, my mind returned to this incident, studying it from all perspectives, each year more intensely convinced, despite the absence of evidence, that it contained some secret. I concluded finally that whatever message there might have been was not contained in speech. So, I realized, my mother used to speak to me, her sharply worded silences cautioning me and chastising me. And it seemed to me I had not only returned to my lover, but was now returning to the Contessa's garden, in which the cherry trees were still blooming like a pilgrim seeking expiation and forgiveness. So I assumed there would be at some point a door with a glittering knob, but when this would happen and where, I had no idea. Okay, I think that's very nice. The language is not really out of the ordinary. I wouldn't say. I mean, I know what people may think of when they think about a poetic language and what it should be and what is poetic language. Is it ornate or is it just unusual, strange uses of language, puzzling, whatever it may be. Um, um, this is very much kind of ordinary language, normal speech patterns we're accustomed to. Um, and if you hadn't known it was a poem before I read it, you might have and didn't just heard it cold. You might have thought it was a piece of prose. Um, it does at times seem like you know a, a nicely um, put together piece of prose. Um, so I think I kind of enjoy poems that give me that impression. There's almost a turning away from style um, in her use of language. And I don't mean that in a pejorative way at all, because I really, what I like about it when you're reading a poem like this um, and you take the words in, when it's presented to you as a poem like this, it can invest ordinary language with this kind of gravity that it normally doesn't have. Um, and it can be very powerful, and I think it really is. There's a thinker, and I think an 18th century thinker called Vico, Gian Battista Vico, and he has a book called The New Science. And he kind of wasn't in sympathy with the Enlightenment that was going on all around him. He was a dissenter to an extent. Um, his purpose in life and his scholarship was to try to understand the ancient world, and um, he had this ideas about how you can do that, and how you can really and how you should um, do all the grinding work necessary to understand the values of the place that you're in, and not even unconsciously impose your own on it. Um, um, and also to understand what language was for them. And in the ancient world, he notes that people were trying to make sense of their world around them, and of course they knew very little. This is the ancient world after all, and everyone was a poet. Everyone who spoke, who said anything, was a poet, because it was they would use language that we would consider tropes, but they weren't tropes to them. It was in effect a literal expression of their environment. I'm not going to do Vico justice, but it's the idea of the speech that everybody uses um, being poetry. Um, is that idea comes to me when I encounter a poem like this, and a lot of Gluck's work in this book, I would say, because it is I think deliberately and assiduously and seriously and in a principled way unshowy, um, and it really gives has that effect for me. But anyway, to get into the what's going on in this poem, um, so the speaker here, I may not be correct in um, assuming that the speaker is a woman, but I'm going to say I'm going to use those pronouns. Um, she remembers a time that she spoke to an older woman, um, as she's sitting in this park or garden near a toy factory where she was working. And she says, as a kind of penance or self punishment, um, after having quote run away from a sad love affair. So this park, you get the idea. This garden is this garden is you get the idea it's a place that she continually retired to. It's her consolation. Uh, she would go there frequently. She usually found it empty at dusk, but today there's this older woman there who tells her that as when she was younger, at any rate, she liked to walk the garden path around her house and see the moon rise. Um, and she said she would like and the way she puts it is, if the path was long enough, I would see the moon rise. And that was the greatest pleasure for her, not sex, not food, not worldly amusement, nothing else, just the moon's rising. Um, and then she notes that it was and then that she also, at times, she would hear the sublime notes of the final ensemble of the Marriage of Figaro coming from somewhere. She didn't know where. Um, and then she notes that it was a garden path, so it was circular, so she would end up back at her her house, um, where she would see the door that had a glittering doorknob. Uh, she could make out in the darkness, barely able to make out in the darkness, the glittering door, the glittering knob. So you've got this image, I suppose, of what this woman used to do when she was younger. She would walk this path. At the furthest point she would get to there would be the moon, if it was one of those nights where it wasn't covered by clouds. And then when she would go back, there'd be another little orb emitting some light, the glittering doorknob. So you get this sort of it's a circuit, so it's kind of an enclosure in that sense, and it's also kind of bookended by these two luminous orbs. One much more luminous than the other, of course, but both of them making light by reflecting it. Um, the glittery doorknob, the glitter reflects the light around it. The moon, of course, we look up in the sky, see the big bright moon. It's of course reflecting the sun. It's not generating that light itself. But at any rate, you've got this um, image of an enclosed, kind of orderly space in which this woman could, um, I guess, kind of feel in touch with her surroundings, maybe with nature, with the universe, by going out and having being able to recreate in a way this experience again and again of seeing the moon and seeing it rise, as she puts it, as she goes along the path. Um, and then the doorknob being kind of a pale reflection of it, suggests some kind of harmony between perhaps humans and their universe. Um, but yeah, and then she notes that sometimes it wouldn't be there, be only barely visible through the clouds, and then she wouldn't hear the music. But uh, the next night, it would often the moon would be back. So then you come to very important two stanzas, I think, and then they're about dead center in the poem, and in a lot of ways, it seems to me they're kind of the heart of it. And I'll read them again. This is the speaker talking. I could think of nothing to say. The story, so pointless as I write it out, was in fact interrupted at every stage with trance-like pauses and prolonged intermissions, so that by this time night had started. Ah, the capacious night, the night so eager to accommodate strange perceptions. I felt that some important secret was about to be entrusted to me, as a torch is passed from one hand to another in a relay. Okay, so she is hearing this story um, from this older woman, and she's writing it out. The speaker characterizes it as pointless. It's um, she herself could think of nothing to say, and then the story, so pointless as I write it out, was in fact interrupted at every stage with trance-like pauses and prolonged intermissions. So the story is not pointless, though. Obviously, the story is one that really gets to her, and when she notes here that it's pointless as she writes it out, when you just see the words, um, that essential to their meaning and essential to their force and power are these silences. Um, and her feeling that, and they're probably the source of her feeling that some important secret was about to be entrusted to her, as a torch is passed from one hand to another. Um, I mean, that's kind of, what, it's kind of what a poem does. Uh, to an extent, it gives you an intimation of something, you feeling something real that um, you can't name, you can't, understand, um, but it feeling very real and very, very strong, and as though you were on the verge of understanding it or breaking through to, to to uncover the secret, some fundamental secret. So I think this woman. Well, I'll come back to that, and I'll go on here. Then the woman apologizes, um, because she realizes that, uh, she isn't talking to whom she thought she was talking to. She says, "I'd mistaken you for one of my friends, who evidently are these statues in this park. Statues don't change, unlike people. The statues don't change. The statues are reliable. The statues are." You can come back there and they'll still be there, like the moon. It's a recurring experience. People change. People aren't always the same. And the older woman doesn't care for that. She gave up on people, she says, but never lost her taste for circular voyages, for the ability, repeated experiences, um, and touchstones that, um, give her, I guess, a sense of equilibrium and stability. Um, and then, the speaker notes that she soon returned to her native city, and she doesn't use explicitly causal language, but the juxtaposition suggests that this experience with this older woman in this park, and what she said to her, and the silences um, that were part of it, um, caused her to return to her native city and her former lover. And she keeps coming back to this incident and keeps turning it over in her mind, and again notes that, um, her feeling, despite the absence of evidence, um, the incident contained some secret, and she finally concludes that whatever message there might have been was not contained in speech. Um, and then she likens it to the way that her mother's sharply worded silences, um, effectively, cautioned her, chastised her, what have you. Um, I suppose it's her experience with her mother. A powerful silence was her first experience of a powerful silence with her mother, as probably, um, many of us could say. Anyway, and she has this feeling that she's not only returned to her lover, but also returned to the Contessa's garden. And then she notes that she doesn't know, though, that whether there will be a glittering knob at the end of her journey, of her, she's in the Contessa's garden, like a pilgrim seeking expiation and forgiveness. And then she assumed there at some point there'd be a door with a glittering knob, but when this would happen and where, I had no idea. So I think, there's uh, there's a lot to take apart there, and I'm only going to go on for a few more minutes, so I'm not going to, take it apart. And I couldn't anyway. This is a serious and ambitious poem, and as such, it is inexhaustible. Um, but I think it's fair to wonder whether this older woman that she encounters in the park is, um, in fact, really there, or is some sort of, hallucination or externalization of some part of herself that yearns for, enclosures, and, um, a balanced, and a sense of equilibrium and stability, and so on and so forth. a certain amount of predictability and security, the feeling of security that arises from all that. If it's that, if this woman is that part of her kind of externalized, if not hallucinated, or if she is a real woman but nonetheless comes to represent that, or um, allows the speaker to 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 see that in herself in a clearer way, by being externalized by as this woman, by the comments that she's making about what she used to like to do on the garden path. So and then so therefore I think, and it does seem that she goes back to her native city after hearing this and having this this powerful experience, um, that was uh, for which the silences were indispensable, not the words but the silences. um, I think it's kind of ambiguous and worth considering whether she had a kind of epiphany in this experience with this woman and realized that she should go back and that she's therefore re-engaging with her life in some uh, meaningful and constructive way, that in some way that she should, and she's realized what's important to her, and this has been a good thing for her, or whether it's a kind of retreat. It's um, she was kind of at a moment of weakness. She um, had this encounter with this woman, and um, the ideas and anxieties and emotions that the conversation stirred up in her, um, caused her uh, to go back as a kind of retreat or in a resigned way. I think there's I think you could go either way with it. I think it's I'm content to leave that in a state of ambiguity. I'm content to have get my negative capability going on that one, and letting those two possibilities exist, and think about them. Um, and this note at the end, I think, is really interesting too, and kind of tantalizing. She says that she assumed that there would be at some point a door with a glittering knob, but when this would happen and where, I had no idea. So that the glittering knob on the older woman's home, um, it, it's her home. It's her anchor. It's her um, uh, it's an indispensable part of the construct that we saw at the beginning, with the this kind of enclosure between the home and the far end of the path and the moon, um, and and we saw the glittering knob as a kind of reduced and paler version of the moon. But the speaker of the poem doesn't have that symmetry. um, she's sort of suspended, as she must be. Um, and so I think there's a lot of this interesting mixture of ideas there, and feelings, and that kind of does right by, I think, the complexity of a human mind and affect in a situation like this. Um, so yeah, I think it's a really worthwhile poem. Sharply worded silence. Um, oh, I should note, um, the first few of these, I could put the text of the poems in the description or in one of the spaces adjacent to the video. And I stopped doing that because, at least so far, the ones that I've been doing are under copyright, and I don't want to get sideways with copyright because I believe in the rule of law. I'll do that when I do a poem that's old and in the public domain, um, and that'll happen. But for the moment, I'm not gonna I'm not gonna get um, I'm not going to do anything with the text with copyrighted material. Okay, so I'll just read the poem and that'll be that. A sharply worded silence. Let me tell you something, said the old woman. We were sitting facing each other in the park at Blank, a city famous for its wooden toys. At the time, I had run away from a sad love affair. As a kind of penance or self punishment, I was working at a factory, carving by hand the tiny hands and feet. The park was my consolation, particularly in the quiet hours after sunset, when it was often abandoned. But on this evening, when I entered what was called the Contessa's Garden, I saw that someone had preceded me. It strikes me now I could have gone ahead, but I had been set on this destination. All day I had been thinking of the cherry trees with which the glade was planted, whose time of blossoming had nearly ended. We sat in silence. Dusk was falling, and with it came a feeling of enclosure as in a train cabin. When I was young, she said, I liked walking the garden path at twilight, and if the path was long enough, I would see the moon rise. That was for me the great pleasure. Not sex, not food, not worldly amusement. I preferred the moon's rising, and sometimes I would hear, at the same moment, the sublime notes of the final ensemble of the Marriage of Figaro. Where did the music come from? I never knew. Because it is the nature of garden paths to be circular, each night after my wanderings, I would find myself at my front door, staring at it, barely able to make out in darkness the glittering knob. It was, she said, a great discovery, albeit my real life. But certain nights, she said, the moon was barely visible through the clouds, and the music never started. A night of pure discouragement. And still the next night I would begin again, and often all would be well. I could think of nothing to say. This story, so pointless as I write it out, was in fact interrupted at every stage with trance-like pauses and prolonged intermissions, so that by this time night had started. Ah, the capacious night, the night so eager to accommodate strange perceptions. I felt that some important secret was about to be entrusted to me, as a torch is passed from one hand to another in a relay. My sincere apologies, she said. I had mistaken you for one of my friends, and she gestured toward the statues we sat among. Heroic men, self-sacrificing, saintly women holding granite babies to their breasts. Not changeable, she said, like human beings. I gave up on them, she said, but I never lost my taste for circular voyages. Correct me if I'm wrong. Above our heads, the cherry blossoms had begun to loosen in the night sky, or maybe the stars were drifting, drifting and falling apart, and where they landed, new worlds would form. Soon afterward, I returned to my native city and was reunited with my former lover. And yet, increasingly, my mind returned to this incident, studying it from all perspectives, each year more intensely convinced, despite the absence of evidence, that it contained some secret. I concluded finally that whatever message there might have been was not contained in speech. So, I realized, my mother used to speak to me, her sharply worded silences cautioning me and chastising me. And it seemed to me I had not only returned to my lover, but was now returning to the Contessa's garden, in which the cherry trees were still blooming like a pilgrim seeking expiation and forgiveness. So I assumed there would be, at some point, a door with a glittering knob. But when this would happen and where, I had no idea. Okay, so I didn't note the that wonderful stanza that about above our heads the cherry blossoms had begun to loosen in the night sky, or maybe the stars were drifting and falling apart, and where they landed, new worlds would form. It's a nice, very nice moment in that in that poem. I always think of things after the fact that I should have said, and that's going to happen again. So anyway, I'll leave it there. Uh, and I don't know what's going to be next. I have no idea actually. So I hope you read Louise Glück, um, and especially not only the poem that I read, but the title poem from this one, "Faithful and Virtuous Night." Really, really great. So, okay, next time.